Professor Marcus Hale had spent years proving himself at the nation's top schools. But on the first day of class, a wealthy student laughed in his face, mocking him for being the only black professor in the department. The lecture hall froze, but the institution stayed silent. What no one knew was that her father's millions kept her untouchable. And in less than a week, Marcus's entire career would be hanging by one question: would anyone believe the truth before it destroyed him? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of Westbridge University's Hall C, catching the polished wood of its rows of desks. Students shuffled in with coffee cups, phones in hand, voices buzzing in the restless way only a first day of class could sound. Some were eager, some hungover, and most were already scrolling through social feeds, instead of glancing at the man setting down his notes at the front of the room. That man was Professor Marcus Hale. He stood tall, 41 years old, dressed sharply, but not extravagantly. Navy suit jacket, crisp white shirt, no tie. His calm movements betrayed years of preparation, but his eyes held something deeper, a practiced vigilance. Marcus had walked into lecture halls like this hundreds of times, yet every entrance carried a reminder that he was stepping into spaces where black professors were rare, and respect had to be earned twice as hard. He adjusted his glasses, placed a folder neatly on the podium, and scanned the room. About 80 students, mostly first years. A few leaned forward, ready to impress. Others already looked bored, but one face, in particular, caught his attention. Brittany Cole. Brittany sat in the center row, not out of humility but because it gave her the best stage. Blonde hair perfectly straightened, nails freshly manicured, a designer bag at her feet worth more than some students' semester books. She leaned back with a smirk as if the whole room was hers. Marcus knew the type, not just privileged but trained to believe the world bent to her will. He took a breath and began. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Political Philosophy 2000. My name is Professor Hale, and I'll be your instructor this semester. This course will ask you to think critically about power, justice, and truth, not just in history but in your everyday lives. Most heads turned up at the sound of his voice, steady and resonant. But just as Marcus moved to write his name on the board, a sharp, mocking sound cut through the air. A laugh. It wasn't loud enough to echo, but it carried with surgical precision. Brittany had covered her mouth with a manicured hand, shaking her head in feigned disbelief. A couple of students nearby glanced at her, unsure whether to laugh too or stay silent. Marcus paused, chalk midair. His back still to the class, he wrote his name across the blackboard. Prof. Marcus Hale. Then he turned, meeting the eyes of his students again. Something amusing? He asked, his tone measured, calm but edged with steel. Brittany shrugged, tilting her head as though surprised to be called out. Oh no, sorry. It's just, I didn't expect the professor to be. She let the pause linger, letting her smirk do the talking. Her eyes swept him up and down. You know, different. The room tightened. A couple of students coughed. Others shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Marcus and Brittany like watching a fuse burn toward an explosive. No one said a word. The silence wasn't neutral. It was complicit. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had heard it all before. Sometimes the words were sharper, other times coated in false innocence. But they always came back to the same thing. He didn't look like what they thought a professor should look like. He could feel the old temptation rising. Ignore it. Keep the lecture moving. Don't give the institution a reason to call him overly sensitive. But he also felt the sting, the same one that never dulled, no matter how many degrees or awards he earned. Instead of snapping, he asked evenly, different how? The smirk widened. Brittany's voice carried with casual arrogance, loud enough for the whole hall. Just thought someone with your background would be, I don't know, teaching something else, not philosophy. The word background dropped heavy. Everyone knew what she meant. A sharp inhale rippled through a few students. Others kept their eyes glued to their laptops, pretending to type. The institution's silence was already present in miniature here. No one dared to challenge Brittany, not when her family's name was literally carved onto the marble wall outside Hall C. Marcus let the words hang in the air. He scanned the students, measuring them not for who laughed, but for who looked away. Finally, he stepped forward. This course, Marcus said slowly, is about questioning assumptions. So let's start with yours. What makes someone qualified to teach philosophy? Their suit? Their skin? Their bank account? Or their knowledge? Brittany's smirk faltered, but only slightly. She crossed her arms, legs tucked under the desk, posture dripping with defiance. I just meant it was unexpected. Don't take it so personally. Marcus held her gaze, refusing to let the retreat into false innocence erase what she had said. But before he could continue, another voice piped up from the back. She's not wrong. You don't exactly look like a philosophy professor. The words came from a boy in a baseball cap, leaning back casually, clearly emboldened by Brittany's laugh. His tone wasn't as sharp, but it carried the same undercurrent. Marcus felt it again, that squeeze around his chest, the reminder that prejudice never needed to be unanimous. It just needed enough silence for it to survive. The class was only 10 minutes in. 10 minutes, and already the line had been drawn. He stepped closer to the front row, voice lower but firmer now. Let me be perfectly clear. Philosophy doesn't belong to one kind of face, one kind of voice, or one kind of body. It belongs to the curious. And if curiosity is what you brought into this room, you'll leave with more than you came with. But if arrogance is all you carry, the weight will crush you before midterm. The words landed, though no one dared to clap or nod. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Brittany leaned back again, lips pursed, pretending to be unbothered. But her eyes flickered, the smallest tell that his refusal to shrink had unsettled her. Marcus turned back to the board and began outlining the syllabus. His voice steady, his hand precise, but his chest burned, because he knew this wasn't the end of it. The laugh had been the opening move, and silence, the student's silence, the institution's silence, was the shield that would let it grow. By the time the class ended, the room emptied with a hurried energy. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered as they left. Only a handful lingered, offering Marcus small nods of encouragement, too subtle to be public. Brittany, however, walked out slowly, pausing at the door just long enough to glance back and smirk once more, as if to say this is only the beginning. Marcus packed his notes, his hands steady, but his thoughts storming. He had spent years proving he belonged, and still, one laugh, just one, could cut through everything like a blade. He knew better than to think it was just a moment. No, it was a signal, and signals had consequences. As he reached for his folder, something slipped from between the papers. A note folded neatly, that hadn't been there when he arrived. He opened it slowly. Inside, written in hurried script, were 4 words that sent a chill through him. Watch your back, Hale. The classroom was empty. The note had no signature. And Marcus suddenly realized, the laugh was only the surface. Something deeper, darker, was already moving against him. Would Marcus confront this hostility head-on, or would silence and fear swallow his authority before the semester even began? Marcus Hale sat behind his polished mahogany desk in his campus office, the late afternoon sun slanting through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of light across his stacks of research papers, framed diplomas, and awards. He rubbed his temples, trying to steady his heartbeat, as the memory from the lecture hall earlier still echoed in his mind. The mocking laugh, Brittany's dismissive smirk, the silence that followed. He glanced at the row of certificates on the wall. Harvard Ph.D. in biochemistry. Postdoctoral research at Stanford. Published in Nature. Cell Science. Awards from national associations. He knew what he had done, but somewhere, in the eyes of too many around him, those credentials were invisible, as if being black neutralized their power. The door opened softly, and his graduate assistant Lena Moreno poked her head in. Professor Hale, you have a meeting with Dr. Whitman in 30 minutes. He sent a message. He says it's urgent. She closed the door. Marcus nodded, rising and straightening his jacket. He collected a folder of student grades and walked toward the hallway, feeling its walls hum with hushed gossip from neighboring offices. In the corridor he passed a cluster of faculty near the water cooler. 2 tenured professors known locally for their politeness and for being gatekeepers of the department. Their heads turned as he approached. One of them, Simmons, forced a tight-lipped smile and said, Marcus, just the person I hope to bump into. The other, Dr. Chang, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Marcus, we were just discussing the next big grant proposal. Do you think your work on enzymatic pathway modulation could tie into Dr. Schneider's petrochemical project? Simmons asked, with a tone that sounded like inclusion, but Marcus had learned to hear the subtext. He paused, then answered tactfully. Absolutely. There's overlap in the signaling cascades. I'd be happy to write a supplemental section. He smiled, perhaps a touch overeager. Chang gave a curt nod and turned away. Simmons cleared his throat and said, "Good. Let's convene next week." They moved off together. Marcus walked on, understanding deeply what had just happened, an invitation to collaborate, but offered with the same cautious politeness reserved for someone not fully accepted. The underlying message: we'll see whether you really qualify. His throat tightened. He entered Dr. Whitman's office, a small, overstuffed space lined with journals and grants posters. Dr. Whitman looked up from his computer, an older white man with thinning silver hair, spectacles perched low. He was head of the Departmental Oversight Committee. His expression was polite, neutral. He gestured to a seat. "Marcus, thank you for coming. I hope this isn't after hours." Marcus offered a small smile. "It's fine. My schedule was open this afternoon." Whitman cleared his throat. "I wanted to discuss your proposal draft. Some feedback came back from the external reviewer. Dr. Patel had concerns about your methodology's reproducibility, and Dr. Lee questioned whether your sample size was sufficient." Marcus's pulse stuttered. He had known the proposal inside and out. He chose his words carefully. "I anticipated their feedback. The reproducibility tests were done in triplicate over independent labs. The sample size, I used a cohort size consistent with standard practice in this domain, validated in prior literature. I've included full statistical justification." Whitman nodded. "Yes, I read your response draft. It was compelling. But there's another issue. Some students have expressed unease, in your class, citing that your lectures are intimidating or brusque. They say the pace is too fast, the expectations too high." One student asked if I could assign a TA to assist more. Marcus felt a tight coil form in his chest. He realized that no matter the data, no matter the publishing record, he was always going to be the one judged, not just for content, but for tone, for posture, for a demeanor filtered through bias. He said quietly, "I intend to maintain rigor in my courses. If students struggle, I will find ways to assist them, but I won't dilute expectations because of personal discomfort." Whitman shifted, sighed. "I understand your position. But you must understand, administration is sensitive these days. We get complaints. This is a public university. We must consider student satisfaction. I'd advise you tread carefully. Be mindful of how you're perceived." Marcus felt the weight of the words. They sounded bureaucratic, reasonable, but they carried a threat: adapt or risk becoming the problem professor. He left the meeting with his proposal folder tight in his hand, breathing shallowly, the corridor seeming narrower than before. Later that evening, in his dimly lit office, Marcus graded a batch of homework, his eyes blurred with fatigue. He clicked open the folder of Brittany's submission. Pages of biochemistry equations, reaction pathways, some missteps here and there. He marked errors, added comments, some praise for her accurate derivations, some critique where she misapplied kinetics assumptions. He saved the document, sent it to her email, and leaned back. Just then his phone vibrated with a message from Lena. "Professor, do you need help drafting lecture slides? I've been working on an annotated version you could review." He replied, "Thank you. Yes, that would help." He paused, then typed, "Could you also check the student feedback portal? I want to monitor anonymous comments that may relate to today's class." As he straightened up, he sensed movement outside the slightly ajar door. He stood, walked out into the hallway, and saw Brittany's friend group, 3 of them, closing a cluster near the stairwell. They looked up at him. One raised a wave. He nodded politely. They murmured between themselves and parted. One of them whispered, "Just loud enough. He's so combative already." Marcus caught the phrase. His skin prickled. The next morning, in the faculty lounge, he overheard snippets. "I don't get his tone so brusque. Is he even qualified to teach this class? I thought he was a lecturer, not full-time." The words stung like darts. None of them referenced his publications or credentials, only his attitude, his comportment, his suitability. A graduate student, in passing, said, "I was skeptical at first, but his lab results are legit." Marcus allowed a small grateful nod, but then a senior faculty member muttered, "Let's see whether his next grant holds up." Again the doubt. In class that morning, Brittany arrived late, sliding into her seat with an air of entitlement. When the lecture began, Marcus walked to the front, his posture calm, voice measured, as if masking the imperceptible tremor beneath. He greeted the students, then launched into the complexities of enzyme kinetics and metabolic flux. He moved among equations, diagrams, historical context. Halfway through, Brittany raised her hand. "Professor Hale, I looked at your curriculum vitae," she began, "but I can't find where you got experience in petrochemical research. How did you qualify to teach the chemical engineering applications module?" Her tone was clipped, and not a simple question. It carried a hidden edge. "You don't belong here." Marcus paused mid-lecture. The room held its breath. He replied evenly, "Brittany, my PhD specialized in bioengineering applications, with crossover into industrial catalysis. My postdoctoral work specifically involved enzyme mimetics for petrochemical pathways. I've co-authored 3 peer-reviewed papers on that exact topic. I'll send you the references." He nodded, turning back to the board, continuing the lecture with a steady stride. The class scribbled notes. Some looked impressed, others looked as though they were waiting for him to trip. Brittany said nothing, but the message was delivered. After class, Marcus returned to his office. He sat at the computer and drafted an email to the department listserv. "Please find attached my full publication list, research breakdown, industry collaborations, and CV for reference. I welcome dialogue and questions about my credentials." He paused. Would that even matter? Would transparency override prejudice? He hit send. Almost immediately, his inbox pinged. A message with the subject line "Read Transparency Concerns" caught his eye. He clicked it open, assuming it was a colleague. Instead, it was from a parent. "To whom it may concern. I am a concerned parent, whose child is enrolled in Professor Marcus Hale's course Chem 4-2. I have become aware of multiple student complaints regarding his demeanor and course difficulty. I must express my disappointment in having my daughter taught under someone who seems ill-suited and possibly out of his depth. I request that you review his qualifications and consider replacing him for the remainder of the semester. Sincerely, Margaret Wilkins." Marcus froze. His heart thundered. A parent demanding his removal, without knowing the facts, without knowing his work, without acknowledging his credentials. The email burned on the screen. He leaned back, the chair creaking, his shoulders sagging. He reread it. A thought flashed in his mind. This demand might be the precursor to formal grievances, departmental pressure, administrative ultimatums. He swallowed hard and opened his publication list, his evidence just as he had published. The rich CV that had meant so much, but in the eyes of this parent, it was invisible. He grabbed his phone and typed to Lena, "Print all my publications and CV. Also, pull any anonymous student feedback about me. We need to see whether this is orchestrated." She replied immediately, "On it." He then leaned his head back against the chair, rubbing his eyes until they stung. Just then a soft knock at the door startled him. He looked up. Brittany stood there, arms crossing over her backpack. She forced a polite expression. "Professor Hale, do you have a moment?" She stepped inside before waiting for confirmation. "I saw your email to the department just now. About your publications and references. Concerned students forwarded it to me." Marcus sat forward, the room cracking with tension. He said, "Yes, I sent it to clarify or mitigate misperceptions, because apparently some students have doubts about my qualifications." Brittany's eyes flickered. She said quietly, "You know, I'm surprised. I always thought, well, you dressed so sharply, lecture so precisely. I assumed your reputation preceded you." She paused. "I suppose I misjudged, but you might want to keep an eye on that parent email." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway, adding, "Some people have more influence than we imagine." Marcus watched her go. The office door closed. He exhaled sharply, aware that Brittany's appearance was not a truce, but a probe. The parent's email was a weapon launched. His credentials, whatever weight they had, were being challenged, not on merit but on perception and influence. The question that lingered: how many allies would defend him when the institution itself seemed to doubt him? His phone buzzed again. Lena's text. "The feedback you requested. Some anonymous reviews say too harsh, cold, unapproachable." And someone pasted the parent email into a student group chat. "It's circulating." Marcus rose, walking to the window. He stared out at the campus green, students milling, talking, unaware or indifferent. He thought of the power that had allowed Brittany's father to use his influence, the institutional safety nets that protected wealth and silence. His credentials felt heavier in his hands than ever. Then his computer pinged once more. A new email. From the provost's office. "Request for meeting. Urgent. Saturday noon. Topic: Course leadership and student relations. Marcus's heart skipped. Apparent demand. A meeting with the provost. Institutional pressure mounting. And Brittany's subtle warning. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and wondered, was this just the beginning, or is the real test yet to come? As he hovered over his inbox, Marcus noticed another unopened email, with the subject "From Brittany Cole, parent," but the sender address wasn't hers, was someone impersonating her. The email still sat open on Marcus's computer screen, its words glowing with venom. He had reread it a dozen times, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't quite believe how easily a stranger, someone who had never met him, could demand his removal as though he were a mistake that needed correcting. He closed his laptop slowly, the weight of the email pressing harder on his chest than the note left in his lecture hall drawer earlier that day. The anonymous warning had unsettled him, but this was different. This wasn't subtle, whispered hostility. This was official, weaponized prejudice. And he knew it would not stop here. The next morning, Marcus walked across campus with his leather satchel slung over his shoulder, the fall air crisp and sharp against his face. Students bustled past, clutching coffees, earbuds in, laughter echoing. To them, the campus was a playground of privilege and possibility. To Marcus, it felt like a chessboard, where the pieces had already been arranged against him. As he entered the main academic building, a janitor greeted him softly. "Morning, Professor Hale." Marcus nodded with a tired smile. "Morning, Charles." It was small gestures like that, respect in spaces where respect was rare, that kept him anchored. But even as he made his way upstairs to his office, whispers trailed him. Two students passing in the hall lowered their voices just enough to be audible. "That's him. Yeah, the one Brittany was talking about. She said he was hostile on the first day." Can you believe it? Marcus kept walking, his expression unreadable. But inside, his heart sank. Brittany hadn't wasted a moment. She was already reshaping the story. In her version, she wasn't the instigator. She was the victim. By the time he reached his office, another email awaited him. This one was from Dean Richard Wallace. "Marcus, please stop by my office this afternoon. We need to discuss a matter regarding one of your students. R.W." Marcus stared at the words, unsurprised but wary. He knew exactly which student it was about. The dean's office sat in the administrative wing, far removed from the lecture halls. It was a space designed to intimidate: tall glass windows, leather chairs, a desk polished to a mirror shine. Dean Wallace was a broad man in his late 50s, with neatly combed silver hair and the permanent air of someone juggling donations and politics rather than education. When Marcus entered, Wallace greeted him with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus, come in. Sit down." Marcus obeyed, setting his satchel at his feet. The dean folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. "I'll get straight to the point. I've received a complaint regarding your conduct in class." Marcus's jaw tightened. "From Brittany Cole's parent, I presume." Wallace blinked, taken aback for only a moment before nodding. "You've seen the email then?" "Yes. And I'd like to state clearly that it is a misrepresentation of what happened. I don't doubt your intentions," Wallace said smoothly. "But perception matters. And the Cole family, well, they matter too." There it was, the words Marcus had been bracing for. Wallace continued, his tone almost apologetic. "Brittany's father, Jonathan Cole, has been one of this university's most generous donors. You've seen the new science building going up. That's the Cole family's contribution. Millions of dollars. Without their philanthropy, half of our programs wouldn't exist." Marcus kept his face neutral, though inside his stomach churned. So that was it. A laugh in the lecture hall. A smear of words in an email. And suddenly his job was entangled with a building made of glass and steel. "I understand donors are important," Marcus said carefully. "But my responsibility is to my students. All of them. That includes Brittany. But it doesn't mean she gets immunity from accountability." Wallace exhaled heavily, as though Marcus's insistence on principle was an inconvenience. "I'm not asking you to give her immunity. I'm asking you to be careful. Perception is delicate when influence is involved. It would be wise not to antagonize her." Marcus stared at him. "So my teaching should bend to her comfort." "I'm asking you to be strategic," Wallace replied, his voice low. "Donors like the Coles, they can make or break careers here. I'd hate to see yours become collateral damage." The message was clear: tread lightly, or be crushed. After the meeting, Marcus walked out into the quad, his thoughts heavy. Students lounged on the grass, The campus bell tower chimed the hour, and for a moment it almost looked idyllic. But beneath the postcard beauty, Marcus felt the rot, the kind of rot money concealed but never erased. He sat on a bench beneath a tree, his mind replaying Wallace's words. Be careful. Donors matter. Perception is delicate. Every phrase circled back to the same truth. His brilliance, his hard-earned credentials, his integrity. They were fragile against the weight of Brittany Cole's last name. As the leaves rustled above him, he remembered his first day interviewing for this job. The search committee had marveled at his resume, praised his publications, nodded approvingly at his Ivy League pedigree. But even then, Marcus had sensed it, admiration laced with doubt, the unspoken question. But can he handle our students? Will he fit here? And now the answer was being decided not by his scholarship, but by Brittany's narrative. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared for his next lecture, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Better watch your step, Professor. Brittany runs this place. Marcus froze, staring at the message. It wasn't just the anonymous note anymore. It wasn't just the parent's email. Now it was text messages invading his private world. He typed back, fingers trembling. Who is this?
No response.
He locked his phone and paced the room. The walls felt closer, the silence heavier. He realized with chilling clarity, Brittany wasn't just another entitled student. She was protected by power. She knew it. And worse, everyone else did too. The next day when Marcus entered the lecture hall, the energy was different. Students leaned closer, waiting. Brittany sat in her usual seat, chin tilted, confidence radiating like a shield. Her smirk was smaller this time, but more dangerous. It wasn't the smirk of a spoiled child anymore. It was the smirk of someone who knew she was untouchable. Marcus began the lecture, his voice steady but his chest tight. He spoke about the concept of invisible power, how the greatest forms of influence were often unseen, operating not through force but through privilege, reputation, and fear. As the words left his mouth, he saw Brittany shift in her chair, almost amused, as if she knew he wasn't lecturing on philosophy anymore. He was lecturing about her. And the worst part was that she wasn't wrong. When the class ended, Brittany lingered. Students filed out quickly, leaving her alone in the center row. She stood, walked slowly toward Marcus, her heels clicking against the floor. Professor Hale, she said sweetly. Her voice dipped in sarcasm. I hope my dad didn't give you too much trouble. Marcus's chest tightened. Excuse me? Oh, she said, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. He's very protective of me. He doesn't like it when professors make me feel uncomfortable. She let the word linger, heavy and dangerous. Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady but sharp. Education isn't meant to be comfortable, Brittany. It's meant to challenge you. Brittany tilted her head, smiling faintly. Well, that depends. Some of us don't have to play by the same rules. The words hung in the air like smoke. She turned and walked out, leaving Marcus frozen in place. That night, Marcus sat in his office again, staring at his mother's photo. He had worked his entire life to reach this place, to prove that intellect and persistence could overcome barriers. But now, sitting in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights, he realized something devastating. Brittany wasn't his biggest obstacle. The institution's silence was, and that silence had just been confirmed at the highest level. Because later that evening, his inbox pinged again. A short email from Dean Wallace. Marcus, just a friendly piece of advice. Be careful with Brittany. Or W. It wasn't a warning. It was a verdict. If even the dean urged caution, what chance did Marcus have of surviving the storm Brittany was about to unleash? The first exam of the semester arrived sooner than students expected. Marcus had designed it carefully, an essay-based assessment that forced them not just to memorize philosophers' names, but to wrestle with ideas, question assumptions, and draw connections to the world around them. It was the kind of test that revealed who had been listening and who had only been pretending. When he collected the blue books, Marcus felt the usual rhythm of the classroom settle. Nervous sighs, rushed scribbles in the final seconds, the clatter of pens closing. He stacked the papers neatly in his satchel and nodded at the class. Remember, he said, philosophy isn't about the right answer. It's about the reasoning that gets you there. Brittany sat in the center row, legs crossed, her designer pen resting on the desk. She didn't look anxious. She looked bored, as if exams were beneath her, just another hoop she could pay her way around. When Marcus gathered her blue book, Her smirk flickered again. Good luck grading that, Professor. The words were casual, almost playful, but the undertone was barbed. That evening, Marcus spread the exams across his desk. The stack was heavy, but grading was a ritual he didn't dread. He enjoyed seeing students grapple with ideas, even in flawed attempts. He took his time, red pen in hand, weighing every argument fairly. Hours passed. He graded 15 exams, then 20, his eyes straining under the fluorescent lights. When he reached Brittany's, he paused. The blue book felt different, not heavier, but charged. He opened it, scanned the first page, and felt his chest sink. The essay was shallow, scattered, barely coherent. She had lifted half her arguments directly from the syllabus handouts, stringing sentences together without depth or originality. Citations were absent, references sloppy. The writing lacked focus, clarity, and effort. Marcus read it again, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he had missed something. Maybe there was a spark of insight hidden beneath the entitlement. But no, the more he read, the clearer it became. Brittany hadn't studied. She hadn't cared. By every academic measure, she had failed. Marcus leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He thought of the dean's warning, of Brittany's father's millions funding the university, of the text message that had told him flatly, "Brittany runs this place." And now here it was, the first true test of fairness. He could pass her, inflate the grade just enough to keep peace, or he could hold her accountable and risk unleashing the wrath of privilege. His mother's words echoed again. "Your knowledge will speak louder than any insult." Marcus picked up his red pen and wrote the truth. Deep. Not failing entirely, he gave partial credit where due, but enough to send a message. Effort mattered, even for the untouchable. When he returned the exams the following week, the classroom buzzed with anticipation. Students always tore into graded work like lottery tickets, eyes flicking between numbers and comments, groans mixing with sighs of relief. Marcus handed Brittany her blue book last. She opened it casually, expecting what? A free pass. A courtesy grade. The moment her eyes landed on the red mark at the top, her posture stiffened, her smirk dissolved. "D+?" she whispered sharply. "Are you serious?" The students around her glanced over, sensing the storm before it broke. Marcus kept his voice calm. "That was the score your work earned." Her cheeks flushed pink with indignation. "This is ridiculous. I know I did better than that." Marcus shook his head. "You relied on summaries instead of analysis, failed to cite sources, and didn't engage with the material. The grade reflects that." Brittany's voice rose louder, no longer private, but public. "So what? You're punishing me because I don't write the way you want. Because I don't fit your idea of who's smart enough." The room stilled. Students looked up from their exams, caught in the spectacle. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him. He knew what they were hearing wasn't just anger. It was accusation. "I'm grading by the same standard for every student," Marcus said firmly. "You're not being singled out." Brittany scoffed, her voice sharp and mocking. "Oh, please. Everyone knows you've had it out for me since the first day. You're targeting me because of who I am."
The words detonated in the room.
A few students gasped. Others whispered. Marcus stood frozen, his chest tight. It wasn't just a protest. It was a declaration. In front of the entire class, Brittany had reframed her failure into victimhood. Whispers rose in the back. "He's targeting her? Is that true? Man, this is messy." Marcus gripped the edge of the podium, steadying himself. He wanted to respond, to defend his integrity with the same force she wielded against him. But he saw the trap clearly. The louder he pushed back, the more her accusation would look credible. The room was already tilting in her favor. His voice, when it finally came, was calm but unyielding. "Brittany, grades are earned, not gifted. If you'd like to appeal, you're free to follow university procedure. But I will not change your score." Her eyes narrowed into slits, her jaw set. She shoved the blue book into her bag with a snap. "This isn't over." The class remained frozen, the tension thick. Marcus moved on with the lecture, but the air never returned to normal. Every word he spoke floated in the shadow of her accusation. After class, a few students lingered, hesitant. One approached him quietly. "Professor Hale, I just wanted to say, I don't think you're being unfair. She didn't even show up to study groups. Everyone knows she wasn't prepared." Marcus thanked the student, but the words rang hollow. Because for every student who defended him, he knew there would be others whispering the opposite. Rumors didn't need evidence. They only needed repetition. And already he could hear the whispers start. That evening, walking across campus, Marcus overheard fragments of conversation. He failed her on purpose. She said he's been picking on her since day one. Man, you don't mess with the Coles. Her dad will bury him. Marcus walked faster, his pulse pounding. He felt the walls closing in, not from what he had done, but from what she claimed he had done. In a world where perception outweighed truth, her version of the story was winning. Back in his office, he stared again at his framed degrees. Harvard, Princeton, Oxford. Proof that he belonged, and yet proof that no amount of belonging could shield him from being cast as the villain in someone else's play. He sank into his chair, exhaustion pressing heavy on his body. He had chosen fairness, and in doing so had painted a target on his back. And Brittany wasn't done. Because the next day, she didn't just whisper accusations in private. She stood in the middle of class with every student watching, and said it out loud. "You're targeting me. Everyone can see it. This class isn't fair." With the accusation now public, Marcus's integrity was no longer in question privately. It was on trial in front of the entire room. The moment Brittany's accusation left her lips, "You're targeting me. Everyone can see it," the room shifted. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she said them, loud, sharp, certain, with her eyes sweeping the room as if daring others to disagree, and the silence that followed was louder than any outburst. Marcus had kept his composure, reminding her in the class that all students were held to the same standards, but his words felt hollow against her performance. The damage was already done. Perception had been planted like a seed. And seeds, Marcus knew, always spread in silence before they bloomed in chaos. The next day, as students entered the lecture hall, the air felt different. No one laughed, but no one greeted him either. Conversations hushed when Marcus stepped inside. Students who once leaned forward now sat back with guarded expressions. Even the eager ones seemed uncertain, as though defending him might cost them something. Marcus lectured with precision, his voice steady, his explanations sharp. But as he scanned the room, he noticed the glances exchanged, the quick smirks between students when he challenged someone's answer, the way pens scribbled not notes but texts under the desk. The whispers had begun. By the end of the week, Marcus started hearing fragments. In the hallways, in the cafeteria, in the library. "Yeah, I heard he hates rich students. My roommate said he grades based on who he likes." Someone said he snapped at Brittany in class, like actually yelled. Marcus clenched his jaw each time. He hadn't raised his voice once. But truth mattered less than repetition. Then came the online posts. One night as Marcus graded papers at his desk, his phone buzzed. A colleague had sent him a screenshot. It was from a student forum, a thread titled "Professor Hale, Professional or Problematic." He read the comments slowly, each line a cut. "He's so aggressive. Always has a chip on his shoulder. Biased against certain students. It's obvious. I wouldn't take his class if you paid me. Is he even qualified? Just saying." Marcus sat frozen, the glow of the screen burning his eyes. He knew anonymous reviews existed, that students vented online. But this wasn't random frustration. It was coordinated. The phrasing was too similar. The tone too rehearsed. Brittany wasn't just complaining in class anymore. She was orchestrating. The next morning, Marcus walked into his office to find two faculty members standing outside, whispering. They stopped abruptly when they saw him, their smiles too quick, too polite. "Morning, Marcus," one of them said, voice thin with forced friendliness. Marcus nodded, pretending not to notice the shift. But inside he felt the sting. It wasn't just the students now. His colleagues had begun to absorb the whispers. Later that day, Dr. Patel knocked gently on his door. She stepped inside, closing it behind her, her face serious. "Marcus," she said softly, "have you seen what's going around online?" "I've seen enough," he replied, voice tight. Patel hesitated, then spoke. "It's not just forums. It's on Rate My Professor too, and a couple of anonymous posts on social media. They're calling you angry. They're saying you're biased." Marcus let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. Angry. The oldest stereotype in the book. Patel's eyes softened. "I know, and it's not fair, but you need to be careful. The administration watches those reviews more closely than they admit." Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaustion washing over him. "So what do you suggest? Smile wider, soften my voice, pretend ignorance when they laugh in my face." Patel didn't answer. She didn't need to. Both of them knew the unspoken rule. The burden of adjustment always fell on him, never on them. By the following week, the classroom no longer felt like a space of learning. It was a battlefield of perception. Every lecture Marcus gave was met with guarded stares, every correction with suspicious whispers. Students no longer asked questions freely. They weighed whether his answer might somehow prove Brittany's claims. One afternoon, as Marcus dismissed class, he overheard two students in the hallway. Brittany says he's obsessed with her. Like he keeps picking on her just to make an example. Really? Damn. That's messed up. Obsessed. The word rattled Marcus. It was a dangerous escalation. Brittany wasn't just painting him as biased. She was recasting his integrity into something sinister. That evening, Marcus opened his email to find another blow. An anonymous complaint filed with the department, claiming he creates a hostile environment and targets specific students unfairly. The language mirrored Brittany's words almost exactly. Marcus's hands trembled on the mouse. He clicked the attached report, scanning it again and again. Anonymous. No proof. Just words on a page. And yet, in an institution obsessed with donor satisfaction and student comfort, those words had power. He closed the laptop, pressing his palms into his eyes. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were becoming a campaign. The twist came the next day. As Marcus entered the lecture hall, he noticed something unusual. Phones. Dozens of them, held low but angled toward him. Students were recording. Every word, every gesture, every inflection. He was no longer teaching. He was performing under surveillance. Brittany sat in her usual spot. Phone on her desk, screen lit, camera angled just enough to catch him. Her smirk was gone. In its place was something colder. Calculation. Marcus continued his lecture, steady and composed, but inside he felt trapped. One wrong word, one hint of frustration, and the recordings would become evidence against him. When the class ended, Brittany stood, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Well, let's see how long the university protects a professor who can't control his bias. Students murmured, phones buzzing as messages flew. Marcus watched her leave, his chest tight. She wasn't even pretending anymore. That night, as Marcus grated in silence, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a private forum or anonymous review. It was Twitter. A tweet was gaining traction, already with hundreds of likes and retweets. My professor is a racist. He targets students, humiliates them in front of class, and hides behind his Ivy League degrees. I Westbridge you. Why is he still here? The username was anonymous, but the language was unmistakable. Brittany's fingerprints were all over it. Marcus stared at the screen, the words burning into him. This wasn't just whispers anymore. This was public, viral. And once something became viral, it had a life of its own. Within minutes, replies began to stack up. Expose him. Typical. They always protect the bad ones. If he's really like that, he needs to go. Marcus set his phone down, his pulse racing. He had spent his life building a reputation of integrity, scholarship, and resilience. But now, in the span of days, it was unraveling, undone, not by truth, but by perception. And the storm was only beginning. As the viral tweet gathered momentum, Marcus realized this wasn't just an attack on his teaching. It was an attack on his very right to exist in that classroom. Marcus had known the email from Dean Wallace would come eventually. After all, the whispers had grown into shouts, and the tweet accusing him of racism had spread across campus faster than any official statement ever could. He had watched helplessly as his name became less a person and more a hashtag. Still, when the summons arrived, please report to the dean's office at 2:00 p.m. to discuss ongoing student concerns. His chest tightened with a dread he hadn't felt since graduate school, when every exam carried the unspoken weight of proving he was good enough to belong. Only now his entire career hung in that balance. The administrative wing was hushed, its marble floors and paneled walls exuding prestige. Marcus walked past portraits of past deans, every one of them white, their stern eyes seeming to follow him into the present. He adjusted his tie and reminded himself of who he was. Harvard graduate, Princeton PhD, Oxford Fellow, credentials no one could erase, yet somehow always invisible. The dean's secretary, a brisk woman with clipped tones, opened the door. They're waiting for you, Professor Hale. Marcus stepped inside. The room was larger than necessary. A rectangular table polished to a shine. Seated around it were Dean Wallace, 2 associate deans, and a representative from the Office of Student Affairs. A pitcher of water sat untouched in the center, glasses aligned like props. "Marcus," Wallace began, gesturing to the chair at the far end. "Thank you for coming. Please." Marcus sat, setting his folder of notes in front of him. His palms were steady, but his heart beat hard against his ribs. Wallace folded his hands. "We've received multiple complaints regarding your classroom environment." Marcus kept his voice calm. "Complaints, or one complaint amplified." A woman from Student Affairs, Ms. Larkin, leaned forward. "Several, actually. Students have described your tone as hostile, and your grading as unfair." Marcus clenched his jaw. "Hostile, I've never raised my voice. Unfair, I apply the same standards to every student. If one fails, it's because their work didn't meet the requirements, not because of who they are." The second associate dean, Dr. Peters, adjusted his glasses. "Perception, Marcus. That's what matters here. If students perceive hostility, then it becomes a problem regardless of intent." Marcus stared at him. "So intent doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't matter. Only perception?" Wallace raised a hand, his tone smoothing over the edges. "No one is questioning your credentials, Marcus. You're an accomplished scholar. But we're in a delicate situation. Brittany Cole." There it was. The name. The inevitable center of gravity pulling everything toward it. Wallace continued, choosing his words carefully. "Her family has been very generous to this institution. Naturally, when concerns arise about her well-being, we have to respond swiftly." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "So this isn't about education. It's about donations." A silence filled the room. No one corrected him, because no one could. Ms. Larkin cleared her throat. "Professor Hale, what we're asking is that you be more mindful of your tone and interactions moving forward. Perhaps provide additional support to students who feel challenged. Especially Brittany." Marcus let out a bitter laugh before he could stop himself. "Additional support? She hasn't shown up to office hours, hasn't engaged with the material. And when she failed her exam, she turned it into a public accusation. And somehow I'm the one on trial." Dr. Peters frowned. "This isn't a trial. It's a conversation." Marcus met his gaze. "It feels like a trial when 4 administrators are questioning my tone instead of addressing a student's deliberate disrespect." Wallace shifted in his seat, his expression tightening. "Marcus, let me be candid. Brittany Cole is not just any student. She has influence. Her family has influence. And while we appreciate your commitment to fairness, we need you to understand the larger picture." Marcus's voice dropped, heavy with frustration. "The larger picture is that a young black professor is being undermined, not because of his work, but because he dared to hold a wealthy white student accountable. That's the picture you're refusing to see." The room froze. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Wallace exhaled. "We're not here to debate identity politics. We're here to keep the peace." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's complicity." The words hung in the air, sharp enough to cut. Ms. Larkin leaned back, arms crossed. "Marcus, if you continue down this path, you're going to find yourself isolated. The board listens to donors. Students talk. Faculty chatter spreads. My advice: de-escalate. Be careful." There it was again. That phrase, "be careful." Marcus rose to his feet, his folder untouched on the table. His voice was steady, though his chest burned. "I became a professor to teach philosophy, not to tiptoe around privilege. If this institution can't stand behind fairness, then it's not philosophy we're teaching. It's performance." The administrators exchanged uneasy glances. Wallace gave a thin smile. "We'll follow up with you, Marcus. Thank you for your time." Dismissed. Just like that, Marcus left the room, the polished hallways feeling colder than ever. He walked past the portraits again, those rows of white faces staring him down like judges. His footsteps echoed against the marble, each one heavier than the last. By the time he reached his office, exhaustion gripped him. He closed the door, sat at his desk, and buried his face in his hands. They hadn't asked about Brittany's laugh. They hadn't asked about her plagiarism, her arrogance, her refusal to learn. All they wanted was for him to be softer, quieter, less visible. And yet the twist came faster than he expected. Because the meeting wasn't as private as the administrators believed. Hours later, Marcus's phone buzzed with a notification. A student had sent him a link. Heart pounding. He clicked. It was an audio recording. The meeting. His words, their words. Everything leaked. A caption accompanied it. They told him to be careful. Because a donor's daughter didn't like her grade. This is what power looks like at Westbridge. The post had already been shared dozens of times. Students were commenting, debating, taking sides. Some defended Marcus. Others doubled down on the whispers. But one thing was undeniable. What was supposed to be a closed-door warning had now spilled into the open. With the recording now in student hands, Marcus had no control over the narrative, and the campus was about to explode with division. The leaked audio spread across campus faster than wildfire. By the following morning, students had already clipped sound bites from the meeting, circulating them with captions that sparked outrage and debate. Some clips emphasized Marcus's quiet defiance. Peace built on silence isn't peace, it's complicity. Others highlighted Dean Wallace's words. We're not here to debate identity politics. We're here to keep the peace. For the first time, the whispers around Marcus were not whispers at all. They were shouted in dining halls, dissected in dorm rooms, debated on the quad. By mid-afternoon, the campus had split into two distinct camps. On one side were those who defended Marcus. They wore his quotes on posters, shared them online with hashtags like Stand with Hale and Fairness Over Funds. For these students, Marcus represented more than one man. They saw him as proof that the system bent to wealth, and that resisting it mattered. On the other side, Brittany's circle pushed their own narrative. They painted Marcus as unprofessional, unhinged, angry. They claimed the audio had been edited to cast him as a hero unfairly. And beneath the surface of their defense, money whispered its influence. The Cole family's donations, the power of their name, the fear that crossing them could mean losing scholarships or opportunities. Marcus watched the divide unfold with growing unease. He never asked to be a symbol, never wanted his classroom to become a battleground. He had entered academia to teach, to open minds, to challenge assumptions. Now he was the assumption being challenged. The following day he walked across the quad, his satchel heavy at his side. Students eyed him openly now. Some nodded in solidarity. A few even stopped him to say, "We're with you, Professor Hale." But others sneered or whispered loudly enough for him to hear. "Yeah, that's him. The one causing all this drama. Bet he loves the attention. Doesn't even appreciate what the Coles have done for this school." Marcus kept walking, his face composed. But inside his heart burned. He didn't love the attention. He hated it. The spotlight wasn't warming. It was blinding. And worse, it threatened to overshadow his work, his teaching, his very reason for being there. When he entered the lecture hall that afternoon, the atmosphere was electric. Students sat divided, not just by rows, but by loyalty. On the left, clusters of students held notebooks with Marcus's quotes, scribbled in bold. On the right, Brittany's allies sat with folded arms, their eyes daring him to slip. Brittany herself sat in the middle, where she always did. Not smirking this time, not even mocking. Her expression was sharper, colder. She looked like someone who knew the game had escalated and was already planning her next move. Marcus set his notes on the podium, inhaled slowly, and began his lecture. He spoke about Plato's allegory of the cave, how perception could trap people into mistaking shadows for truth. He chose his words carefully, but the irony was impossible to miss. Every sentence was met with polarized reactions. Supporters scribbled eagerly, nodding. Detractors smirked or rolled their eyes. Brittany sat motionless, her gaze locked on Marcus like a predator waiting for weakness. Halfway through the lecture, a voice from the back cut in. "Professor Hale, do you think philosophy applies to situations where a professor abuses power?" The room froze. All eyes shifted to Marcus. He looked at the student calmly. "Philosophy applies to power in every form, especially when power is misused. But accusations are not proof. We must learn to separate perception from evidence." The student leaned back, unsatisfied. Whispers spread again, a tide Marcus could not stop. When class ended, students spilled into the hallway, their debate spilling out with them. Two students clashed openly near the stairwell. "He's literally standing up to corruption. Can't you see that?" "No, he's making himself the victim. My parents said professors like him thrive on playing oppressed." Marcus walked past them silently, each word cutting like glass. He wanted to correct them, to explain, but he knew the danger. Anything he said outside the lecture hall would be twisted, reframed, posted online. He was safer in silence, though silence felt like surrender. Later that evening, Marcus met Dr. Patel in her office. She had been following the storm closely, her expression drawn tight. "They're splitting the campus, Marcus," she said quietly. "Half the students are calling you a hero. The other half want you gone. It's not just about you anymore. It's about what you represent." "I didn't ask to represent anything," Marcus replied, his voice heavy. "I just wanted to teach." Patel sighed. "That's the tragedy of it. They're not seeing Marcus Hale, the professor. They're seeing the symbol. And symbols, they don't get treated fairly." Marcus rubbed his temples. "So what do I do? Sit back while they tear my name apart?" "You keep teaching," Patel said softly. "You keep showing them what fairness looks like. Because if you stop, they win." Her words steadied him, if only slightly. But as Marcus left her office, he couldn't shake the image of Brittany's face during class. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't retreating. She was waiting. 2 days later, the twist came. As Marcus arrived on campus, he noticed flyers taped to walls, bulletin boards, even lampposts outside the library. Bold black letters screamed from the page. "Protest. No more biased professors. Hold Hale accountable. Friday at noon. Outside Lecture Hall C." Marcus stopped cold, staring at the words. His stomach tightened as passing students pointed, whispering. Some looked at him with pity, others with satisfaction. He pulled a flyer from the wall and read the fine print. It wasn't signed by Brittany, but her fingerprints were obvious. The language mirrored her accusations exactly. "Targets students, creates hostility, abuses authority." By the time Marcus reached his office, his inbox was flooded with messages. Some were supportive. "Ignore them. We've got your back." Others were venomous. "You don't belong here. Step down before you embarrass yourself further." He sank into his chair, the flyer still in his hand. He had known the battle was escalating, but he hadn't expected this. A public protest, students gathering not to debate ideas, but to erase him entirely. That night, as he prepared his notes for the next class, his phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number again. "You think you can win? Wait until the cameras are there. Everyone will see what you really are." Marcus's chest tightened. Cameras. Of course, the protest wouldn't just be a protest, it would be a spectacle. And in a world where perception ruled over truth, spectacle was the deadliest weapon of all. He placed the flyer on his desk, beside his mother's photo. Her eyes in the picture seemed to ask him silently, "Will you let them take this from you? Will you let them write your story for you?" Marcus exhaled, steady but weary. He knew he couldn't hide. He would have to walk through the fire, not around it. And the fire was already being stoked. Because word had spread. The protest outside Lecture Hall C wasn't just planned, it was growing. As Friday approached, Marcus realized he wasn't preparing for a lecture anymore. He was preparing for a showdown in front of the entire campus. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Marcus barely slept the night before, his thoughts haunted by the flyer's bold words. Protest, no more biased professors. He had graded papers until dawn, not out of obligation but to remind himself of why he had come to Westbridge in the first place. But even as he wrote careful feedback in the margins of essays, his mind replayed the same question. How do you teach truth in a place that only wants performance? By noon, the quad outside Lecture Hall C was unrecognizable. Students gathered in throngs, their voices rising in waves of chants. Signs bobbed above the crowd, some painted hastily on cardboard, others printed with glossy precision. On one side, posters read, "Stand with Hale. Education, not donations. Fairness over funds." On the other, Brittany's faction raised theirs just as high. "And bias now. No place for hostility. Professors shouldn't intimidate students." The sound was deafening, a chorus of outrage and defiance. Students on both sides shouted over each other, the clash less about facts and more about loyalty. The quad, usually a place of casual laughter and music, now pulsed like an arena. Marcus approached slowly, his satchel slung across his shoulder, his steps heavy. As he neared the crowd, phones rose like weapons. Dozens of lenses pointed at him, capturing every angle. He hadn't even spoken yet, and already his silence was being recorded, dissected, shared. Near the center of the chaos stood Brittany. She had positioned herself at the very front of the opposition. flanked by her friends, her arms crossed in theatrical confidence. She wore a tailored coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile wide and triumphant. It wasn't the smirk of the first day anymore. It was the smile of someone who believed the game was already won. Marcus locked eyes with her for a brief moment. She didn't flinch. She wanted this confrontation. The crowd parted slightly as Marcus climbed the steps toward the lecture hall doors. Supporters shouted encouragement. "We believe in you, Professor," while detractors hurled accusations. "Resign. Bias. Get out of here." He kept his head high, but inside his chest tightened with every word. Each shout was another reminder that his reputation had become public property, debated by strangers who had never set foot in his class. As he reached the door, a group of reporters emerged from the crowd, microphones extended toward him, cameras flashing, voices overlapping. "Professor Hale, how do you respond to accusations of bias? Do you believe the leaked audio has been taken out of context? Are you worried about losing your position here?" Marcus froze. He hadn't expected media, not yet. But of course it made sense. A viral tweet, a leaked recording, a divided campus. It was a perfect storm for headlines. He lifted his hands slightly, signaling calm. "I came here to teach. My commitment is to fairness and integrity in the classroom. I will not compromise that." His voice was steady, but even as he spoke, Brittany stepped forward. She didn't wait for a microphone. She knew the cameras would find her. "As a student," she said loudly, projecting her voice to the entire crowd, "I can tell you this man has made me feel unsafe, unvalued, and targeted from day one. This isn't about philosophy. This is about respect. And if he can't respect his students, then he shouldn't be teaching." The crowd roared, splitting in two, cheers from her side, boos from his supporters. Marcus stood silent, his jaw clenched. He wanted to respond, to remind everyone of the first laugh, the smirk, the deliberate disrespect. But he knew how it would sound. A black professor accusing a wealthy white student of cruelty. The optics were poisoned before he even began. One of the reporters seized the moment, shoving a microphone closer. "Professor Hale, do you think Brittany Cole is racist?" The question hit like a thunderclap. The crowd hushed instantly, as if the very air held its breath. Students leaned forward. Phones angled higher. The question hung in the space between them, not just words but a trap carefully laid. Marcus's pulse pounded in his ears. He saw Brittany's smile widen, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. She wanted him to say it. She wanted him to put the word racist into the world, where it could be replayed endlessly, framed as an attack, twisted into a headline, "Black professor calls student racist on live TV." If he said yes, he would be branded angry, radical, unprofessional. If he said no, he would betray himself, his truth, the reality of what he had endured. Either way, the question was designed to erase his integrity and replace it with spectacle. The cameras inched closer. The chant softened to a low murmur, waiting for a heartbeat. Marcus felt the entire campus pressing down on him, waiting for one word. And in that silence, he thought of his mother's photo on his desk, her voice whispering through memory. "Your knowledge will speak louder than any insult, baby. But only if you give it the chance." Marcus drew in his slow breath, his eyes locked on the reporter. And just as he parted his lips to answer, a voice from the crowd cut through. "Ask her why she laughed at him on the first day." The words came from Jamal, the freshman who had once stopped by Marcus's office to thank him. His voice was raw, unfiltered, unplanned, but it landed like a strike of lightning. The crowd erupted again, gasps, shouts, accusations flying both ways. Supporters seized on it, chanting, "She laughed, she laughed," while Brittany's side screamed back, "Lies, lies." The cameras swiveled, catching the chaos, the clash, the spectacle magnified. Marcus stood frozen on the steps, caught between the demand for an answer and the eruption sparked by Jamal's unexpected defense. He had escaped the question for the moment, but he knew it wasn't gone. It would return, sharper, louder, deadlier, and the world would still be waiting for his answer. With the question still hanging, "Do you think Brittany is racist?" Marcus realized the next words he spoke could define not just his semester but his entire career. The protest was still echoing in Marcus's ears when the email arrived. His phone vibrated as he sat in his office late that evening, the blinds drawn, the quiet broken only by the hum of the overhead light. "Professor Hale, please report to the dean's office tomorrow morning, at 9 a.m. This is a mandatory meeting. RW. Mandatory. The word carried more weight than any accusation. Marcus knew what it meant. The institution had shifted from whispers to action. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The protest, the chants, the question he hadn't answered about Brittany's racism. It had all accelerated. Now the administration wanted him behind closed doors again. Only this time, he sensed it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a verdict. The next morning, Marcus walked across campus under gray skies. The air was damp with mist. The quad strangely quiet after yesterday's chaos. Students still glanced at him as he passed, some with nods of support, others with narrowed eyes. But the noise was gone. Silence now felt more dangerous than shouting. The dean's office was colder than usual. Or maybe it was just Marcus's nerves. Dean Wallace sat at the head of the polished table, his expression flat. To his left sat Dr. Peters, the associate dean, who had warned Marcus about perception. To his right was a man Marcus didn't recognize. Sharp suit, clipped hair, a presence that screamed legal counsel. "Marcus," Wallace began, his tone clipped but courteous. "Thank you for coming." Marcus sat, his leather satchel at his feet. He clasped his hands together to keep them steady. Wallace didn't waste time. "We need to address the events of yesterday. The protest has drawn national attention. Reporters are contacting our office. Alumni are calling. And more importantly, donors are watching." Marcus nodded slowly. "I see." Peters adjusted his glasses, his voice clinical. "The Cole family has already reached out. Jonathan Cole is deeply concerned. He believes his daughter has been humiliated, and he's expressed doubt about your ability to teach impartially." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. She failed an exam she didn't study for. That's not humiliation, that's accountability. The lawyer cleared his throat, finally speaking. His voice was calm but edged like steel. "Mr. Cole has informed the board that if this matter is not resolved quickly, he will reconsider his financial commitments. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars. The new science building, ongoing scholarships, research grants. All of it could vanish." Marcus stared at him. "So my career is a bargaining chip for a building." Wallace exhaled slowly, as though the weight of his own words wearied him. "Marcus, this is bigger than you or me. The board is under pressure. They want this situation contained. Cleanly." Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady but laced with fire. "Contained how?" Wallace hesitated, then folded his hands on the table. "A quiet resignation, effective immediately. You'll step down voluntarily. We'll issue a statement about personal reasons, and the university will thank you for your service. In return, we won't pursue disciplinary action. You'll leave with your record intact." The room went still. Marcus felt the words crash over him like ice water. A quiet resignation, after everything he had endured. After every degree, every lecture, every sacrifice, they wanted him erased. Quietly, he let out a bitter laugh. "You want me to resign to protect the feelings of a wealthy student who laughed in my face on the first day of class?" Peters shifted uncomfortably. "It's not about feelings. It's about stability. The institution cannot afford this level of division." Marcus's voice sharpened. "The institution can't afford truth. That's what you're saying. That's what this has always been about." The lawyer leaned in slightly. "Professor Hale, think carefully. If you fight this, the Coles will not hesitate to escalate. They have resources, connections. Your reputation will be shredded, your career options limited. A resignation protects you." Quietly, Marcus's chest tightened. "Protects you. No, it protected them. It protected the donors, the board, the institution's fragile image. His protection was collateral." He sat back, exhaling slowly. "No." Wallace's brow furrowed. "No, I will not resign," Marcus said firmly. "Not for Brittany, not for her father, and not for you. I earned my place here. I will not let you strip it away because wealth demands it." The room fell silent. Peters stared at the table. The lawyer scribbled something in his notes. Wallace's jaw tightened, his mask of courtesy slipping into irritation. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Wallace said quietly. Marcus met his eyes. Truth is always harder than silence. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with tension thick enough to choke. Wallace dismissed him with a curt nod. His words clipped, "We'll be in touch." Marcus left the office, his steps slow, his chest burning. Outside, the mist had turned into rain, cold drops pelting the quad. Students rushed by under umbrellas, their laughter faint, disconnected from the storm raging inside him. Back in his office, Marcus closed the door and sat heavily at his desk. He replayed every word of the meeting, every threat, every insinuation. They wanted him gone, not because of evidence, not because of misconduct, but because money had spoken louder than truth. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing into him. For the first time, he wondered if they could succeed, not by proving him wrong, but by wearing him down. As the hours passed, he forced himself back into routine, grading essays, answering emails, but the weight of the ultimatum lingered like smoke in his lungs. It was late evening, when the sound broke his focus. A faint slide at the bottom of his door. Marcus looked up, frowning. Someone had slipped something under it. He stood, walked over, and picked it up. A plain manila folder. No markings, no name. He carried it to his desk, heart pounding. Slowly, he opened it. Inside were photocopied documents, pages of academic records, disciplinary notes, plagiarism reports, all with the same name, Brittany Cole. Marcus's breath caught. The dates stretched back years. Instances of cheating, copied assignments, complaints quietly filed by professors and just as quietly erased. A pattern of misconduct, buried under privilege. At the very bottom, one page stood out. A letter from a professor 2 years prior, warning that Brittany had purchased essays online. The letter had been dismissed, resolved with no further action. Marcus sat frozen, the folder heavy in his hands. Whoever had given this to him had risked something. And in this folder lay proof that Brittany's protection wasn't about fairness. It was about concealment. The question that haunted him now wasn't whether he should use it. It was whether he dared. With the folder of Brittany's hidden misconduct in his hands, Marcus realized he had been given a weapon. But using it could cost him everything. Or save. Marcus stared at the manila folder, as if it were radioactive. The rain outside his office streaked the window in blurred lines, the sound of each drop echoing louder than usual. He ran his hand over the papers again, his fingertips brushing the edges, as if confirming it was real. Every page inside was a revelation, and a confirmation. Plagiarized essays, copied lab reports, complaints from professors who had dared to call Brittany out. Their words careful but pointed. This student submitted work identical to another's. Sources fabricated. Exam answers appear to have been shared in advance. And beside each accusation, the resolution was always the same. Case dismissed. Resolved informally. Matter closed. Marcus flipped faster, scanning the trail of erasure. One report from 2 years earlier described Brittany submitting an essay that matched almost word for word with a published article. The professor had flagged it, but within weeks the case had disappeared. The final note read, "Issue addressed privately with the family. No academic penalty." Marcus pressed his palm against his forehead, his chest heavy. He whispered to himself, "So this is what truth looks like when it's buried." It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern, years of misconduct, washed clean by money, reputation, and intimidation. Every failure scrubbed from her record. Every consequence intercepted by the Cole family's influence. The anger that welled in Marcus was not sharp but deep, slow, like molten rock rising. He thought of his own journey, the endless nights in graduate school, the sacrifices, the relentless demand to be twice as good, just to be considered equal. And here was Brittany, coasting on privilege, her failures hidden behind glossy plaques on new buildings. But beneath the anger was something else, fear. Why had this folder come to him? Who had risked giving him these documents? And more importantly, what would happen if he used them? Marcus stood, pacing the office. His reflection in the rain-streaked window looked unfamiliar, tired, worn, caught between rage and restraint. He imagined the headlines if this folder became public. Wealthy donor's daughter exposed for years of cheating. The story would explode, Brittany's credibility would collapse. And perhaps finally, the whispers about Marcus would be drowned out by undeniable evidence. But he also imagined the fallout. The university would never admit to covering it up. They'd deny the folder's authenticity, accuse him of fabricating evidence, paint him as desperate and vindictive. He could already hear Dean Wallace's voice. "Marcus, this isn't about truth. It's about perception." His reputation could be destroyed, not by silence, but by the very act of speaking. He sat back down, staring at the folder, as though it were a mirror reflecting everything he hated about the system. For the first time, he questioned not just Brittany's protection, but the very foundation of the institution he worked for. A knock on his door startled him. He slid the folder into his desk drawer quickly and called out, "Come in." The door opened hesitantly. Jamal stepped inside, the freshman who had defended him during the protest. His eyes were wide, his voice careful. "Professor Hale, you okay?" Marcus forced a thin smile. "I'm fine, Jamal. Just long day." Jamal nodded, shifting on his feet. "I wanted to say, what you're going through. It's messed up. Everyone's talking, but I know the truth. I saw the way she laughed at you that first day. I saw the way she acts. You don't deserve this." Marcus's chest softened for a moment. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Jamal hesitated, then asked quietly, "Are you gonna fight them?" Marcus looked at him, the question heavier than Jamal could understand. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise he'd stand tall, expose the lies, hold the system accountable. But the folder in his drawer reminded him of the danger. Fighting didn't just risk losing. It risked being erased entirely. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. "But sometimes the hardest part of a fight is deciding whether to throw the first punch." Jamal nodded, his eyes filled with something like awe. "Whatever you do, I'll be behind you." After Jamal left, Marcus opened the drawer again, staring at the folder as though it were alive. His mind raced with possibilities. He could leak it anonymously. He could send it to the press. He could confront the dean with it. But another thought crept in, colder and sharper. What if this is a trap? What if the folder wasn't a gift but bait? A way to push him into overstepping, into using confidential records that could later be used to discredit him. If he presented it, they could accuse him of misconduct, of breaching privacy. It would shift the spotlight from Brittany's corruption back onto him. The weight of it was suffocating. That night, Marcus brought the folder home. He sat at his kitchen table, the paper spread out under the dim light. His small apartment was quiet, filled only with the hum of the refrigerator. He studied the documents again, searching for something solid, something irrefutable. And there it was. Buried in the pile was a scanned email exchange between a professor and the Academic Integrity Office. The professor had reported Brittany for submitting a plagiarized paper. The reply from the office was blunt. "This matter has been reviewed and will be handled privately. No further action is necessary." The professor's final response was chilling in its resignation. "Understood. Thank you." Marcus leaned back, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just Brittany. This was the system. Professors had tried to hold her accountable, but the machinery of wealth had silenced them. And now, he had the receipts. But again, the question returned, at what cost? The next morning, as Marcus prepared for class, he carried the folder in his satchel. It felt heavier than his books, heavier than his laptop, heavier than everything he had worked for. Walking across campus, he noticed students still divided. Some nodded at him with subtle support. Others glared openly. Brittany, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen, though her presence was felt everywhere in the whispers. He taught his class with precision, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he looked at the satchel by his desk, he felt the decision pressing harder, to expose or not. After class, as students filed out, Dr. Patel appeared at the door. She entered quietly, her expression concerned. "Marcus, I heard rumors you've got something." Marcus hesitated, then spoke cautiously. "Something found me." Patel's eyes widened slightly. "If it's what I think it is, you need to be careful. Information like that can destroy careers. Or save them," Marcus countered. Patel nodded slowly. "True. But the system doesn't reward truth-tellers, Marcus. It punishes them." He looked at her, his voice steady. "Then maybe it's time someone broke that system." Patel studied him, then placed a hand on his arm. "If you do this, you won't just be fighting Brittany. You'll be fighting the university itself, and they will fight back." Marcus said nothing. The silence between them was answer enough. That evening, alone in his office again, Marcus placed the folder on his desk. He spread the documents out, one by one, until the truth of Brittany Cole's misconduct lay bare before him. Years of cheating, covered up, protected. He felt the weight of history pressing on him, not just his own, but every black professor who had walked into a room and been doubted, dismissed, erased. He thought of his mother, her voice steady in memory. "Your knowledge will speak louder than any insult, baby." But tonight, knowledge wasn't enough. Action was. Marcus sat back, staring at the pile. The choice was in front of him. Expose Brittany and risk everything. stay silent, and be erased quietly. Neither path offered safety, but one offered justice. With Brittany's secret history in his hands, Marcus knew the next step would define everything. His career, his reputation, and perhaps even his life. The only question was, would he dare to expose her? The folder sat on Marcus's desk like a secret too heavy to move. He hadn't told anyone about it, except for the vague admission to Dr. Patel. Even then, he hadn't shown her the documents. Something inside him knew trust could only stretch so far in an institution that thrived on survival. He spent the next few days in careful silence, trying to maintain routine. He lectured, he graded, he answered questions. Outwardly, he appeared steady, but inwardly, every moment was consumed by a singular dilemma. Should I use? But before he could even act, the system acted first. It began with whispers in the faculty lounge. Marcus entered one afternoon to refill his coffee, and the room went strangely quiet. Colleagues who usually offered perfunctory nods now avoided his eyes. Dr. Whitman muttered something under his breath and left abruptly. Another professor glanced at Marcus with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Marcus ignored it, filled his cup, and walked back to his office. But as he closed the door behind him, his phone buzzed. A colleague had texted a link. Breaking news: Westbridge professor under fire for inflammatory emails. Marcus's stomach dropped. He clicked the link, his hands cold. The article was from a local outlet, but written with national flair. It displayed screenshots of his private emails, messages he had written months earlier, venting frustrations to a trusted colleague. Lines taken out of context, stripped of nuance, now framed as unprofessional rants. One line in bold read: "Sometimes it feels like no matter how much I give, this institution will never see me as enough." Another, highlighted for impact: "The silence here is suffocating, and I don't know how long I can keep swallowing it." The article framed them as evidence of instability, as though Marcus were a ticking time bomb, rather than a man exhausted by daily microaggressions and institutional neglect. Marcus's pulse thundered. He knew exactly who those emails had been sent to. Dr. Ellis, the department chair, a man Marcus had trusted, confided in when the pressure grew unbearable. He had written those messages in moments of vulnerability, believing they would be held in confidence. And now, here they were, plastered online, his private doubts turned into public ammunition. Marcus sat back in his chair, numb. The betrayal cut deeper than Brittany's accusations, deeper than the dean's ultimatums. This wasn't a student trying to protect her privilege. This was a colleague, a supposed peer weaponizing his humanity against him. A knock sounded at his door. Dr. Patel entered cautiously, holding her phone. "Marcus, have you seen it?" He nodded slowly, his voice tight. "I've seen it." Patel's eyes softened with sympathy. "This is cruel. Those were personal messages. Ellis had no right." Marcus interrupted, his voice low but sharp. "He had power, and now he's used it." Patel sat across from him, her tone gentle. "You need to get ahead of this. The narrative is shifting. They'll call you unstable. They'll say you're unfit. If you don't respond, they'll define you." Marcus exhaled, his chest heavy. "If I respond, I'll confirm their frame. Damned if I do, erased if I don't." Patel hesitated, then said quietly, "Whoever slipped you that folder, maybe they knew this was coming. Maybe they wanted you to have leverage." Marcus shook his head. "Leverage against corruption. Yes. But if I use it now, it'll look like desperation. They'll say I fabricated it to cover my instability." Patel fell silent. She knew he was right. That night, Marcus returned to his apartment, the city lights flickering through his blinds. He sat at his desk, the article still glowing on his laptop screen. He scrolled through the comments beneath it, each one sharper than the last. Unstable. Shouldn't be near students. Classic victim complex. Westbridge needs real professors, not activists. He's making this about race. Always the same excuse. Marcus closed the laptop abruptly, the bile rising in his throat. He stood, pacing the small space of his living room. For years he had told himself that integrity would shield him, that if he worked hard enough, if he proved himself relentlessly, the truth would hold. But now his integrity had been twisted into instability. His honesty turned into weakness. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't colleagues or news alerts. It was his university email inbox. Hundreds of new messages, flooding in faster than he could delete them. He opened one at random. "Step down before you hurt someone." Another. "You don't belong here. Fraud." And another, more chilling, "We know where your office is. Watch yourself." Marcus's chest tightened. Anonymous threats. Dozens of them, piling into his inbox. Some vague, others specific, all carrying the same message. Leave. Quit. Disappear. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. For the first time, the fear felt physical. Not just career-ending, but life-threatening. He whispered to himself, "They want me broken." But as his eyes drifted toward the satchel on the floor, the folder inside still waiting, another thought took shape. Maybe the reason the folder had found him was exactly this moment, when everything else had been stripped from him, when even his colleagues had betrayed him, when threats filled his inbox like poison. Maybe this was when the truth had to be unleashed. He stared at the satchel, his pulse steadying, his decision growing heavier with each breath. As anonymous threats filled his inbox, Marcus knew the battle was no longer just professional. It had become survival, and the folder in his possession might be his only weapon left. The threats in Marcus's inbox had not stopped. They multiplied. Each morning he opened his email with a knot in his stomach, knowing he'd find dozens more messages waiting, some calling him a fraud, some laced with racial slurs, others warning him that if he dared show up to class again, something would happen. At first Marcus had tried deleting them. But soon he realized the sheer volume wasn't the point. It wasn't about any one threat. It was about wearing him down, breaking his will, making him doubt whether truth could survive under such weight. And above it all, the board was moving. On Monday afternoon, an email arrived from Dean Wallace's office. "Professor Hale, the Board of Trustees has scheduled an emergency hearing this Friday to review concerns regarding your professional conduct. Attendance is mandatory." Marcus read it twice, then a third time. Friday, 4 days. That was all the time he had to prepare. 4 days before a group of wealthy administrators, beholden to donors, decided whether his career ended in disgrace. He closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. 4 days, and the only weapon he had was the folder still locked in his drawer. That night, Marcus spread the documents across his kitchen table again. He read them not as a scholar, but as a strategist, circling dates, underlining phrases, piecing together a timeline. Brittany's misconduct wasn't just isolated incidents. It was a narrative, a story of privilege shielding failure, again and again. But as he studied, fear gnawed at him. If he presented this folder, the university would accuse him of obtaining confidential documents improperly. They'd turn the spotlight back on him, say he had breached privacy, maybe even sue him. And yet, if he stayed silent, the board would swallow Brittany's narrative whole. He'd be dismissed quietly, erased, forgotten. Every hour mattered now. On Tuesday, Marcus skipped the faculty lounge entirely. He ate lunch in his office, the blinds closed, the folder spread across his desk. He highlighted, cross-referenced, and drafted notes. His phone buzzed constantly with new messages. Students, colleagues, reporters. He ignored them all. Every distraction was a theft of time. By evening, exhaustion pressed against his skull. But he pushed forward. He wasn't just compiling evidence. He was constructing a lifeline. Wednesday morning brought another blow. An op-ed appeared in the campus newspaper. Professor Hale and the Problem of Professionalism. The author, unnamed but clearly aligned with Brittany's camp, painted Marcus as unstable, hostile, incapable of respecting student perspectives. It quoted the leaked emails again, twisting his frustrations into evidence of volatility. Marcus read it with clenched fists. He had no voice in this paper, no rebuttal. Silence had become his prison, and Brittany's megaphone. But that afternoon, as he sifted through the folder again, Marcus found something new, a report buried near the back. Unlike the others, this one wasn't from a professor. It was from a student. Anonymous. The words were shaky, but clear. "I know Brittany Cole buys her essays. She bragged about it in the library. I tried to report her, but I don't want my name attached. Her family is too powerful. Please do something." Marcus froze. His hands trembled slightly as he held the page. This wasn't just faculty accusing Brittany. This was a student voice. Silenced by fear. It mirrored exactly what Marcus himself was experiencing. Truth strangled by influence. For the first time in days, a spark of clarity cut through his fatigue. This wasn't just about him. It was about every student, every professor who had been forced into silence. He pressed his palms against the table and whispered, "No more silence." Thursday came faster than he wanted. The hearing was less than 24 hours away. Marcus worked nonstop, assembling his case into a binder. Every plagiarized report, every dismissed complaint, every instance of cover-up. He wrote a timeline, crafted an opening statement, rehearsed it aloud until his voice cracked. But with each hour, the harassment grew louder. His inbox overflowed again, emails calling him angry, dangerous, a disgrace. His phone buzzed with anonymous texts: "Don't show up tomorrow. You're finished. If you try to drag Brittany down, we'll drag you down harder." By late afternoon, Marcus's eyes burned from lack of sleep. His body ached, his throat dry. Yet he kept working, knowing the binder in front of him was the only shield he had left. As night fell, he received a knock at his office door. It was Dr. Patel. She stepped inside quietly, her eyes weary, but kind. "Marcus," she said softly, "you look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't," he admitted. She glanced at the binder. The stack of documents spread out. "Is that what I think it is?" Marcus hesitated. Then, with deliberate care, he opened the binder to show her a few of the pages. Patel's eyes widened as she read. "My God," she whispered. This is everything. Years of it." Marcus nodded. "It's what they've hidden, what they've protected." Patel looked up at him, her face grave. "If you use this tomorrow, Marcus, it won't just expose Brittany. It'll expose the university. They'll come after you harder than ever. Are you ready for that?" Marcus's voice was quiet but resolute. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I can't walk into that room empty-handed." Patel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then be careful, please." When she left, Marcus sat alone in the quiet office, the weight of her warning pressing against him. He closed the binder, slid it into his satchel, and leaned back in his chair. He had done all he could. He was ready, or as ready as anyone could be, for tomorrow's hearing. Friday morning arrived gray and heavy. Marcus dressed carefully, choosing his best suit, his cleanest shirt. He looked at himself in the mirror, his reflection tired but unbroken. He thought again of his mother's voice, the one that had guided him through every trial. "Your knowledge will speak louder than any insult." As he gathered his satchel, binder inside, he felt the weight not just of paper, but of history. He wasn't walking into a hearing, he was walking into a war between truth and perception. At 8:30, 30 minutes before the hearing, Marcus sat in his office one last time, collecting his thoughts. The silence was thick, his pulse steady but hard. He reached for his satchel, and then he heard it. A soft knock at the door. He frowned. "Come in." The door opened slowly, and standing there, framed by the dim hallway light, was Brittany Cole. She stepped inside without hesitation, her designer coat draped over her shoulders. Her eyes locked on his. She closed the door gently behind her. "Professor Hale," she said smoothly, almost sweetly, "we need to talk." Marcus froze, his hand still resting on the satchel. For the first time, Brittany wasn't smirking. She wasn't mocking. She looked calm, deliberate, like someone about to make an offer. Just before the hearing, Brittany herself had walked into his office. But what did she want, and what was she willing to risk to get it? Brittany's sudden appearance in Marcus's office had left him frozen, his satchel still at his side. For a moment he had thought she came to taunt him again, to deliver one last strike before the hearing. But her expression was different this time, calm, deliberate, almost calculated in a way that unsettled him more than her smirk ever had. "Professor Hale," she said smoothly, her voice laced with control, "you don't have to go through with this hearing." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Brittany stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "We both know you've been digging, and I know what you have." Marcus's chest tightened. "Do you?" She tilted her head, her smile faint but sharp. "The folder, the records. Someone gave you things they shouldn't have. And trust me, if you think you can use them, you're wrong. If you present them, it'll be you on trial, not me. They'll crucify you for breaching confidentiality. And everything you've worked for? Gone." Marcus stared at her, his hand tightening on the satchel. She wasn't pleading. She was warning. She wanted him to know that she knew. "Then why are you here?" he asked coldly. Her eyes gleamed. "'Cause I don't want this to get messy. I don't want the spectacle. If you walk away quietly, resign with grace, I'll make sure it looks clean. No more rumors. No more press. You can keep your dignity." Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "My dignity? That's what you're offering me? You humiliate me, orchestrate lies, weaponize privilege, And now you want to package my erasure as dignity. Brittany's smile didn't falter. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about you, it never was. It's about power, and power always wins. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. Sometimes truth wins, and today we'll see which one matters more. Her smile flickered, just for a moment. Then she turned, adjusted her coat, and walked out without another word. Marcus sat in silence, his pulse racing. He knew the risk. He knew what Brittany had said was true. The university could spin his possession of the folder as misconduct. But he also knew one thing. If he didn't speak, her lies would stand forever. Minutes later, Marcus arrived at the boardroom. The room was cavernous, lined with portraits of past trustees. A long mahogany table stretched across the center, around which sat the board of trustees, Dean Wallace, faculty representatives, and even a few donors who had been invited in advisory capacity. At the far end, Brittany sat beside her father, Jonathan Cole. Jonathan was a tall, imposing man with slicked-back silver hair, his suit tailored, his expression calm in the way only men with absolute confidence could carry. The moment Marcus walked in, conversations hushed. All eyes turned to him. "Professor Hale," Wallace said smoothly, gesturing to a seat. "Thank you for joining us. We're here to address the concerns raised regarding your conduct, and to determine the appropriate course of action moving forward." Marcus sat, setting his satchel on the table. His heart pounded, but his face remained steady. Wallace continued, "Mr. Cole has expressed grave concern about his daughter's experience in your class. Other students have echoed her discomfort. We have reviewed online feedback and student complaints, and frankly, the situation has become untenable. We're here to give you the opportunity to respond before a decision is made." Jonathan Cole leaned forward, his voice deep and controlled. "This doesn't have to be complicated, Professor. You resign today quietly, and we all move on. My family continues its support for this institution, and your career remains intact elsewhere. Fight this, and you'll destroy yourself." Brittany sat beside him, her arms crossed, her expression serene. She looked untouchable, as though the verdict had already been written. Marcus glanced around the room. He saw faculty shifting uncomfortably, donors watching like spectators, administrators scribbling notes. They were all waiting for him to fold. But instead, Marcus reached into his satchel. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled out the binder. "I appreciate the opportunity to respond," he began, his voice steady, "because for too long, this conversation has been one-sided. Accusations without evidence. Perception without proof. Today, I bring proof." The room stiffened. Jonathan Cole's eyes narrowed. Brittany's posture faltered slightly. Marcus opened the binder and began sliding copies of documents across the table. Over the past several years, Brittany Cole has been reported for multiple instances of plagiarism, academic dishonesty, and misconduct. Each time, those reports were dismissed, not because the evidence was lacking, but because her last name was powerful enough to erase it. Gasps rippled through the room. Board members leaned forward, scanning the papers. Professors exchanged shocked glances. "This," Marcus continued, holding up a page, "is a professor's report detailing an essay Brittany submitted that matched a published article nearly word for word. The case was dismissed with a note, handled privately with the family." He laid down another. "This is a student testimony, fearful of attaching their name, stating that Brittany bragged about buying essays." Again dismissed. The air grew electric. Brittany's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharper than she intended. "These are lies. Old complaints that went nowhere because they weren't true." Jonathan Cole placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. His voice was calm but laced with steel. "Mr. Hale, what you're doing is reckless. These are confidential documents. You've obtained them improperly. Presenting them here is a violation of trust and legality." Marcus locked eyes with him. What's truly reckless is allowing a student to cheat her way through this institution, protected by money, while honest students suffer the weight of real standards. What's reckless is silencing truth in favor of donations. And if you want to talk about legality, let's talk about fraud, because that's what this is. Academic fraud covered up at the highest levels. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Some board members demanded order. Others whispered furiously. Faculty murmured in disbelief. Wallace slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We will not turn this into a spectacle." But the spectacle was already alive. Brittany stood, her face flushed. This is harassment. He's obsessed with me. He's trying to destroy me because I dared to stand up to him. Marcus rose too, his voice calm but piercing. You stood up to nothing. You mocked me on the first day, spread lies, orchestrated whispers, and when held accountable, you turned your failure into victimhood. But here today, the truth stands taller than privilege. The room froze. For the first time, Brittany's facade cracked fully. Her voice trembled as she shouted, "Daddy, do something." Jonathan Cole's jaw tightened, his eyes sweeping the board. This is unacceptable. If this continues, my family will pull every cent we've pledged. You will not let one unstable professor ruin what we've built here. Chaos exploded. Board members spoke over each other. Some argued for dismissal. Others demanded investigation. Donors threatened to walk. Faculty demanded transparency. In the middle of it all, Dean Wallace stood, his face pale. Enough. This hearing is recessed immediately. We will reconvene after reviewing this material. The gavel struck down hard, echoing through the boardroom like a gunshot. Marcus stood silently, his binder still open, his chest heavy but steady. He had done it. He had forced the truth into the room. But the eruption around him made one thing clear. This was not victory. This was war. As the boardroom descended into chaos, Marcus realized the recess wasn't a pause. It was the prelude to something far more dangerous. The boardroom had been cleared after Wallace slammed down the gavel. Marcus stepped out into the marble hallway, the echoes of chaos still ringing behind him. Voices had risen, accusations had flown, and for a brief, piercing moment, Brittany's polished facade had cracked. Now the institution that had shielded her for years was forced into the light. Marcus stood by the tall windows, his binder pressed tightly to his chest. Outside, the campus buzzed. News of the confrontation was already spreading. Students refreshing their phones, rumors jumping faster than facts, hashtags igniting again. He could see clusters gathering on the quad, their signs from last week's protest being repurposed with new slogans. Dr. Patel joined him in the hallway, her face pale but her eyes alive with something like awe. "Marcus," she whispered, "I've never seen this place like that. You put them on the defensive." Marcus shook his head. "For now. But you heard Wallace. This isn't over." She touched his arm gently. "No. But for the first time, it isn't just you under the microscope. It's them." Hours later, the board reconvened. The atmosphere was sharper, more brittle. Gone was the confident hum of donors and trustees. Now every person carried tension in their shoulders, fear in their glances. Marcus took his seat again, the binder still at his side. Brittany and her father sat opposite him. But the difference was clear. Jonathan Cole's usual composure had hardened into steel, but Brittany's mask was slipping. Her hand shook slightly as she poured water into her glass. Her eyes darted more than they ever had. Dean Wallace opened the session, his tone strained. "We have reviewed the documents presented by Professor Hale. While questions remain about their procurement, their content raises serious concerns regarding academic integrity and institutional oversight." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marcus didn't flinch. He knew they would question how he got the documents that had always been their shield. But the content was undeniable. Once read, it couldn't be unread. One trustee, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "I find it troubling that so many reports against Miss Cole were dismissed without action. This is a pattern, not an isolated case." Jonathan Cole interjected smoothly. "With all due respect, these so-called reports are unverified. Gossip, speculation. My daughter has worked hard, and she's being smeared by a professor who feels threatened by her standing." Marcus kept his voice calm but firm. "I didn't create those reports. I didn't fabricate them. They were written by your colleagues, your faculty, your students. The only smear is the one your money painted over the truth." Brittany slammed her hand on the table. "You're obsessed with me. Admit it. You've hated me since the first day. That's why you're doing this. You want to ruin me because you can't handle someone with more influence than you." Her words hung in the air, louder than she intended. A few trustees shifted uncomfortably. Marcus didn't respond, because he didn't need to. Her outburst was the proof he had never been allowed to say aloud. Entitlement speaking louder than reason. Dr. Peters, who had once cautioned Marcus about perception, cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, Miss Cole, the board cannot ignore this evidence. The integrity of this university is at stake." Jonathan Cole's jaw tightened. "The integrity of this university is built on the support of families like mine. You remove my daughter, you remove my funding. Do you really want that headline? For the first time, the board didn't shrink under his words. The room was divided now, between those who feared his threat and those who realized silence would make them complicit. Dean Wallace tried to steady the chaos. Let us remain focused. The question is not about donations, but about accountability. Marcus leaned forward, his voice cutting through. The question is about truth. For years, this institution has bent its back to protect privilege while demanding the rest of us carry double the weight. If you punish me for speaking truth, then you prove that nothing here has ever been about education. The room went silent. For the first time, Brittany looked small. The polished veneer of confidence was gone, replaced with flashes of panic. She whispered something to her father, her hands fidgeting, her gaze lowered. The trustees deliberated in hushed tones. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Marcus sat still, his binder on the table, his chest steady despite the storm raging inside him. He knew victory would never be clean. Even if Brittany was exposed, the system that created her shield would remain. Finally, Dean Wallace stood. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. The board has reached a decision. All eyes turned to him. Brittany's breathing quickened. Jonathan Cole's stare drilled into the dean. Marcus sat upright, his pulse loud in his ears. Wallace read from the prepared statement. Effective immediately, Brittany Cole is suspended from Westbridge University, pending a full investigation into academic dishonesty. Furthermore, an independent committee will be established to review past cases of alleged misconduct that were previously dismissed. Gasps erupted. Faculty leaned back in shock. A trustee whispered, "My God, they actually did it." Brittany's face crumpled, the tears coming fast. "No, you can't do this. Daddy." Jonathan Cole stood abruptly, his voice booming. "This is an outrage, an absolute betrayal. If you move forward with this, Westbridge will lose everything we've built together." But this time, the board didn't fold. A trustee replied firmly, "Perhaps it's time we rebuild on truth." For a fleeting moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't in weeks: relief. Truth had broken through. The lies had collapsed. The facade was gone. But before he could exhale fully, Wallace continued reading. His next words landed like a blow to the chest. "And as for Professor Marcus Hale, while the board acknowledges the courage it took to bring these issues to light, we cannot ignore the disruption caused to the university's reputation. Therefore, effective immediately, Professor Hale is placed on administrative leave, pending further review." The room froze. Marcus's chest tightened. Leave, not termination, but not vindication either. A punishment disguised as neutrality. He sat in silence, the relief mixing instantly with bitterness. They had exposed Brittany, yes, but they still couldn't allow a black professor to walk away unscathed. The gavel struck again. "This session is concluded." Marcus gathered his binder slowly, the weight of the decision pressing hard against him. Brittany was undone, but so was he. Victory had come, but at a cost too sharp to celebrate. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed with dozens of messages. Students had already heard. Some celebrated. Others questioned. Many demanded answers. But amid the chaos, one text stood out. It was from an unknown number. "The board may have voted, but the real fight starts now." The board had spoken, but their decision left Marcus suspended, Brittany disgraced, and the university in chaos. The question lingered. Who would truly win in the collapse of privilege? The board's decision lingered in the air, long after the gavel struck. Suspended. It wasn't vindication, and it wasn't defeat. It was a reminder that Marcus's victory had been allowed only in fragments, rationed out so the institution could protect itself. Brittany had been disgraced. Yes, but Marcus had still been silenced. The hall outside the boardroom buzzed like a hive. Students refreshed their phones, reading the updates that spread like fire across social media. Brittany Cole suspended. Board launches review into past misconduct. Marcus Hale placed on leave. On the quad, the division was no longer even. Supporters of Marcus surged forward, cheering his courage. Protest signs once painted with accusations now bore new slogans. Truth has consequences, and education over wealth. Yet on the other side, Brittany's defenders dwindled. The evidence had been too stark, too undeniable. Their chants died down to murmurs, their posters drooped, and some simply disappeared. For the first time, Brittany was on the outside of the power she had always wielded. She left the boardroom beside her father, but the optics had shifted. Students pulled out their phones as she passed, capturing her hunched posture, the tears she couldn't stop. The father who whispered furiously in her ear. The videos circulated instantly. Brittany Cole, once untouchable, walking the walk of shame across her own campus. Marcus stood quietly at the window, watching from above. He felt no triumph in the image, only exhaustion. He knew humiliation wasn't justice. It wasn't accountability. It was only the beginning of a reckoning Brittany would now have to face, stripped of the shield her family's money had always provided. In the days that followed, Brittany's collapse spread far beyond the campus. The suspension made headlines. National outlets that once framed Marcus as unstable now seized on the scandal of privilege exposed. Editorials raged about donor influence, about the rot inside institutions meant to nurture fairness.
Brittany's name became a symbol, but not the kind she had built her life on. No longer was she the daughter of power, the girl who could laugh in a professor's face without consequence. She became the face of entitlement undone.
Her social circles shrank overnight. Friends who once laughed beside her now avoided her in the dining hall. Organizations quietly cut her name from membership lists. Sororities distanced themselves. She was no longer Brittany the untouchable. She was Brittany the liability. And in that isolation, she learned her first true lesson. The world she thought would always bend for her was finally bending away. For Marcus, the aftermath was quieter but heavier. His office sat locked, the blinds drawn. Administrative leave meant no classes, no students, no lectures. The board had promised a review process, but Marcus knew what that really meant. Time to let the noise die down. Time for the institution to calculate which side history would favor. At night he sat at his kitchen table, staring at his mother's photo. He thought of the binder, the documents still stacked neatly on his desk at home. He thought of how truth had finally pierced the institution's silence, and yet how it had cost him his classroom, his place of belonging. Dr. Patel visited often. She urged him not to lose hope. "Marcus," she said one evening, "you've lit a fire here. The students see it. Faculty see it. Even if the board wants you gone, your voice is louder now than it ever was inside those walls." He gave her a tired smile. "A voice without a classroom feels like an echo." Patel shook her head. "Sometimes an echo shakes more walls than a speech ever could." The true measure of his impact became clear one afternoon when Marcus walked across the campus, uncertain whether he belonged there at all. Students saw him and began to rise. One by one they stood, clapping. No chants this time, no protests, just applause. A wave of acknowledgement, raw and unchoreographed. Marcus slowed, his chest tightening. He had taught these students philosophy, but now they were teaching him resilience. The knowledge that even scars could inspire. Later a letter arrived in his inbox. It wasn't anonymous. It was signed by Jamal, the freshman who had defended him at the protest. "Professor Hale, I've decided to major in philosophy because of you. I've never seen anyone stand up to power the way you did. Even if they push you out, know this. You changed me. And I won't forget it." Marcus closed the laptop slowly, his hands trembling. For the first time since the storm began, he allowed himself a small, steady smile. Brittany, meanwhile, spiraled. Without the shield of institutional silence, every crack in her past split open. Former professors came forward, anonymously at first, confirming what Marcus had revealed. Students whispered about the essays she had bought, the assignments she had copied. Even those who once feared her name now found courage in her downfall. She withdrew from classes entirely, retreating to her family's estate outside the city. But privilege could not repair reputation. Even beyond campus, Brittany Cole became shorthand for arrogance undone. She scrolled through headlines that no longer praised her father's donations, but questioned his role in shielding misconduct. For the first time, Brittany faced the weight of accountability, and it wasn't just academic, it was social, it was personal, and it was a lesson she would never forget. Yet Marcus knew better than to mistake her collapse for systemic victory. The university still placed him on leave. The board still debated whether his act of courage was insubordination or integrity. The same machine that had protected Brittany now looked for ways to erase him without scandal. He felt it in every conversation with administrators. Measured words, polite smiles, veiled warnings. The machine was still alive, but he also felt something else. A shift. A crack. Students who once whispered now spoke louder. Faculty who once stayed silent now admitted their unease. The fight wasn't over, but it had begun, and it could not be silenced again. Marcus walked the quad one evening, the sun dipping low. He passed groups of students studying, laughing, debating. Some looked up and smiled at him, a recognition that went beyond courtesy. He realized then that his presence alone had become its own lesson. He whispered to himself, "Knowledge speaks louder." Weeks later, the board reconvened. This time, the atmosphere was subdued. Jonathan Cole had pulled his donations, and Westbridge University faced financial tremors. But the institution survived, because institutions always survive. They would build new relationships, court new donors, but they would never erase what had happened. Marcus sat outside the boardroom. As they deliberated his future, he didn't know if they would reinstate him, dismiss him, or leave him in limbo. But for the first time, he understood that his value was not bound to their decision. His worth was larger than their verdict. And yet when the door opened and Dean Wallace called his name, his heart still pounded. The narrator's voice closes in here, pulling back from Marcus and Brittany, from the boardroom in the quad, widening the frame to the larger question. Justice had come, but not from the institution. It had come from Marcus's courage, from a folder slipped under a door, from students refusing silence, from truth that demanded to be spoken even when power threatened to erase it. The story ends where it began, with a laugh in a lecture hall, a laugh that was supposed to define Marcus as invisible, powerless, dismissed. But the laugh had echoed back, louder than Brittany ever imagined, unraveling the very privilege that made her believe she was untouchable. And yet, the scars remained. Marcus had lost his classroom. Brittany had lost her shield. The institution had lost its mask. The haunting question lingered, heavy, unresolved. When justice depends not on systems but on courage, what does that say about the world we live in? Stories like this aren't just fiction. They mirror the struggles too many face in silence every day. If this story moved you, type yes if you believe in justice, and subscribe so more voices like this are never ignored again.